Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayahono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayahono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gayahono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the Gayahono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. My name is Nima Kudva. I teach in the Department of City and Regional Planning at AAP, and I serve as Associate Dean of the Faculty at Cornell. But I'm here today in my role as House Professor and Dean of Carl Becker House, one of 5 houses in Cornell's West Campus housing system. It is Cornell's faculty-led residential college program, and we are charged with bringing students, staff, and faculty together in a spirit of inquiry and active citizenship. So in non-pandemic time, each house breaks bread together on Wednesday evenings, and then we meet in the House Professor's apartments, and we have conversations on all sorts of issues that interest us as a community. But in this time of distancing, we come together in this virtual format, which is created from loss, but has produced something quite wonderful in allowing all of us to gather. Students, staff, faculty, alumni, and random people from all over the world, not just from West Campus and Ithaca, but from many points beyond. But none of this would have actually been possible without the help of many people, and so I want to actually acknowledge that as well. I want to start with those who helped with today's session. So the Center for Inequality Studies for their co-sponsorship, Assistant Dean Jeff Godowski of Rose House, who partnered with me to plan the webinar, and Kyle Carr and Owen Parsegian of eCornell, who are our showrunners for today. Beyond that, Caitlin and Chris at eCornell for their work over the past year, my 9 absolutely wonderful and close colleagues, house professors and assistant deans on West Campus, and most importantly, our 2 key sponsors, the Cohen-Horowitz Family Fund and the Class of 1966. So a little bit more about them. Several years ago, Jennifer Cohen, Human Ecology, Class of 1993, and her spouse, Mark Horowitz, generously funded a lecture series, and it's now in its 4th year. And the intent was to bring attention to key public policy topics that face our nation. 5 of our webinars have been supported by them. Thank you. Our second sponsor are the Class of 66, who have adopted West Campus in their efforts to support student wellness at Cornell through a wide range of programming, including this webinar and 4 others that focused on the arts. The Class of 66, they visit West Campus during the trustees' October meeting each year, and we hope to be able to meet with all of you. I know many of you are on this call. We hope to see you in the fall, and thank you in person. And now for our webinar and the series that we called And Injustice for All. It's been a year-long exploration of the foundational causes and the responses to racial and social injustice in the United States. We've explored scholarship and policy and activism in 5 key areas: voting, criminal justice, higher education, climate change, and housing. And we've alternated the policy panels with panels of practitioners who explore artistic interventions and arts activism. It's been a long year for all of us. We're exhausted, we're sorrowful, and we know that the problems that we face have been that we face collectively are amplified. We've lost members of our close and our far circles. And on West Campus, we lost just last week Philip Zukowski at Becker. We lost Matthew Cravella in December at Rose House. And also last year, Carl Robinson, who was a student of House Professor Shorna Allred at Cook House. So we want to hold them all, and everything that has gone on this past year, these past 18 months, in our minds and in our hearts as we draw this series to a close. Sorry. So what are we doing today? So Full Circle is what we are calling this last session, and it's our 10th and last webinar. And it brings us back to where we started, in one place, alone and together, grappling with how to engage the complex issues that both the pandemic and these movements for racial and social justice have spotlighted. We want to consider who we are as original inhabitants of this land who struggle with ongoing displacement and dispossession, as others who came to find work in farms and factories, as yet others who fled oppression and sought refuge, including in Ithaca, once a stop on the Underground Railroad, or it's now a city of asylum for persecuted artists and writers, and has always been a community with a very large international and immigrant presence because of Cornell, Ithaca College, and TC3. So our four panelists, who I'm going to introduce individually shortly, are all artists and they're educators. And they reflect the many myriad ways in which we come together in the US, and as I described, in Ithaca. So our panelists come from different places, different nations, they have different identities, and they use different media as forms of expression. They will speak to their practice and the ways in which it, in this current moment especially, can offer us glimpses of how we collectively can bear witness, even as we build moments for reflection, for resolution, for renewal, and for action. And so that was the sort of our idea of doing this today. I'm going to introduce our four panelists, after which we'll shift to hearing from them directly. And our first panelist today is Santi Smith, Dagalunyakwa, Picking Up the Sky, a multidisciplinary artist from the Gayenga Nation, 6 nations of the Grand River, which Americans will also know as the Mohawk Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, of which the Gayahono are also a part. Santi founded the Gahawi Dance Theatre and describes her work as embodied storytelling and performance that speaks to Indigenous identity and continuance. She will share with us today a piece on the Mush Hole, a Mohawk residential school, which served as the model for all other residential schools that followed in Canada. The Mush Hole speaks to intergenerational trauma, but as Santi said to me when we were speaking about this, it also screams resilience. Santi is the 19th Chancellor of McMaster University. Our second panelist is Terry Plater, an artist who started painting full-time after she retired from a 30-plus year career in higher education, including positions on the faculties of architecture and in the administration at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and her last position was at Cornell. Primarily working as a realist painter, Terry seeks to really kind of illuminate the contemporary and the everyday, while focusing on questions of equity aesthetics. Our third panelist is the photojournalist and neurologist Julian Fisher, whose work is in the tradition of Walker Evans, who was his teacher when he was an undergraduate at Yale. Fisher freelanced for multiple publications. Things that you would have heard of would be the New York Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, National Geographic, among other publications. But he also went on to study medicine at Johns Hopkins and became a neurologist and teaches at the Harvard Med School. Throughout, he retained an interest in societal questions and those problems that face us every day. And he returned to photography to document the effects of income inequality on the American middle class. And that project, he calls it Trapped in the Middle, and that's what he will be sharing with us today. And finally, Pradeep Dalal, who is joining us this evening, or it's his very early morning, from Mumbai in India. Pradeep is New York based and a Mumbai born artist, trained as an architect and a photographer, and he also teaches, as with everyone on this panel, at the International Center for Photography, at Bard, at Cooper Union, and he's the program director of the Arts Writers Grant Program at the Andy Warhol Foundation. His work is sort of hard to pin down in terms of a genre. Is it photography? Is it image manipulation? Is it collage? Is it text? In thematic terms, it touches on questions of becoming, across spaces, in time, and relationally. Or at least that's my read of it. I don't know if he would agree, about that. But anyway, he reflects on what we miss and what reappears and what remains in shadows. So all the things I've mentioned about in terms of our panelists' work and their artistic practice touches on how maybe each of us could start to think about how we work our way through life every day. We started our series, this 10-webinar series, with that thought that we wanted to educate ourselves. We wanted to learn to pay attention, and we wanted to consider how we must take action. And we come back to it today, full circle, in our very last presentation. So I've asked each of our panelists to share some remarks and their work with us before we transition to a conversation. And we'll take questions from all of you at the end of the 4 sets of remarks. So I'm going to encourage you to submit them in the chat section, which is being monitored. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you're writing from. It helps us all to connect and creates a community in this virtual space of this webinar. Also, quick note, this event is being recorded and it will be available at the same eCornell URL afterwards. So now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Santi, who will kick off tonight's panel. Santi, all yours.
There you go. It's gonna go. What Gunualado, Santi Smith, Dagalinyakwa, Nyungyak, Skyengahaga, Niwagahotsoda, Waganyakta, Oswega, Niwadagedo, Anoa. My name is Santi. In my Gayengeha, my Haudenosaunee name is Dagalinyakwa, which means picking up the sky. And I'm here currently in Six Nations, and I'm happy to be here. I'd like to acknowledge my Haudenosaunee kinship nations in Ithaca, Gaihono Nation, the lands and waters, which are so very close to my traditional Gayengahaga homelands. So Nyawe for inviting me to be a part of this important sharing in the close of your series. So tonight I wanted to speak a little bit about my work within the site and the grounds of the Mohawk Institute Residential School close to my home community of Six Nations. The Mohawk Institute is also known as the Mush Hole because that's the nickname the community gave the school because they ate mush for the majority of their time at the school. It's the oldest residential school in Canada, after which all others are modeled. It ran from 1828 to 1970, first as an industrial boarding school for First Nations children from Six Nations and for other communities across Ontario and Quebec and some even into New York State. So for 142 years, the MO of the school was to forcefully assimilate children into Euro-Western society and sever the continuity of culture between parent and child. It was run like a military style school. Children actually had very little schooling and were rather laborers, farmers, and domestics. They experienced a range of abuses from sexual to food deprivation, food experiments, and corporal punishment at the hands of faculty and staff, which was run by state and the church, the Anglican Church. So my grandfather attended the school and my great-grandmother, Mabel Smith, attended the school, and she entered the school at the age of 2. As an intergenerational survivor of the school, my family history and that reality that my ancestors' experience was hidden. It was a shameful past, and only when I was working on the research was I able to uncover these silenced stories, and many of them have been etched and scratched into the walls of the school by the children. and my family didn't speak of their experience. So with the collaboration of living survivors, their writings, their interviews, talk series at the Woodland Cultural Center, I was able to cobble together what my ancestors' lives at the school might have been like. Canada's residential school system parallels that of the United States Indian boarding schools, and I believe the closest one to Ithaca is the Thomas Indian School. It was located in Irving, New York, which is close to the Cattaraugus Reserve. And these schools had a very similar assimilative colonial agenda of, quote, getting rid of the Indian problem and to more easily remove Indians from their lands. So in 2018, I premiered a performance called The Mush Hole, and it represents two generations of survivors, which demonstrates the intergenerational effects in the long history of the residential school. And if I wanted to share this quote, and it's also within the design of the video projection, the media projection of the show, and it's by Canada's first Prime Minister, and he stated in 18, Sir John A. Macdonald, he said, when the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages. And though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly impressed upon myself as head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence. And the only way to do that would be to put them in central training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits and modes of thought of white men. So that persisted across the whole over 100 years of residential schools in Canada. Our performance is about intergenerational resilience. It is visceral. It's a heartbreaking portrayal, created from stories and work collaboration with living survivors, weaving their memories together, reliving traumas, school experience, loss of culture, remembrance, and the ability to return to the school and bear witness to their experience there. And it hovers at the edge of devastation, but there is a through line of hope, hope for education, hope for sharing the legacy so that it will reflect accurately the history of the land. This dark legacy is not also far from the past because it's reflective of current disproportionate health outcomes, incarceration levels, cultural and family fracture, and has been replaced by the child welfare system of apprehending Indigenous children straight away from their parents. So it has current reaching effects. Every single element represented on the stage, as I said, comes from survivors sharing their experiences with us. And really what we are doing is moving past the shame, being able to share their story and to share truth. And so we started as a activation and a response to the Mohawk Institute. I'm going to share a clip, and you'll see a little bit of the clip, but closer to the end, you'll see some of our initial creation. And just to let you know, when it goes inside of the school, our very first creation phase was in the boys' playroom, which was a basement room. And I worked with three Haudenosaunee youth, and so we represent students and the youth. It was really important to be able to acknowledge being in the space, responding to the site, responding to the grounds. And so you'll get to see how we represented the bricks and mortar of the school in the telling of the experiences that happened specifically in rooms, which I can talk to later. So let's have a look at the clip.
I tore this school down 1,000 times in my mind. watched it burn into the same ground. I lost my heart. I crawled this far by myself without your help. I'll reach farther, I'll get back my heart. Every day's a year, but I'll start. I'm on the same ground, made it this far. I will find my way in this dark. I don't think this ice is gonna turn me around. I don't think this air is gonna freeze my lungs if I ask for help to get back on my feet, to walk on this goddamn earth where there's nothing left of me. I'll reach farther, I'll get back my heart. Every day's a year, but I'll start.
Santi?
So that shows a little bit of the some of the imagery, the recreation of the school and the site, and also we worked through an indigenous process in dramaturgy. We condoled with the space. We honored the legacy of past students and survivors, and we offer education. So when we perform this, which we have been touring around across Canada, and we were just about to go into Washington, D.C., March 11, 2020, and we had to cut short because of the emerging pandemic. So had that not happened, we would have had our first show in the United States. So thank you, and I will look forward to chatting later. Nyawe.
Thank you so much, Santi. We're going to next hear from Terry Plater, who is speaking to us from Ithaca.
I am. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. That was so inspiring. I'm happier than ever now to be a part of this group. I can see all kinds of possibilities. In my brief remarks, I'm going to refer to a current project that I'm working on. And I'm going to use that as a way to talk about the ways in which the work of the independent artist differs from other artists, and the ways in which someone like me working in this way now is presented with opportunities and challenges for my own work, but also for a life of public activism. I'm currently working on a project of paintings, oils, and watercolors that are going to be shown in Auburn, New York next month. Started with the realization that my family, I don't have to go back very many generations in my family to realize that my relatives or ancestors were living in the time that was depicted in the Harriet Tubman movie, Colson Whitehead's book, The Aftermath of Slavery. And we'd been looking at family photos anyway. And so I'm doing a series of paintings based on photographs from my family, dating from the mid-19th century, late to mid-19th century through the mid-20th century. So that would be the aftermath of slavery, segregation. My family's from Washington, D.C. area, and civil rights. And in these paintings, photographs rather, the people are unfamiliar to me. The settings are somewhat familiar. And it's a process that started me thinking about several things. It started me thinking about home as a safe place, especially now in a continued but heightened period of violence against Black Americans, against Native peoples, against Asians and Latinos. I was using it as a way to get to know my own history intergenerational and intergenerational act, as Santi has said, and to see home as a place of solace and strength. And I'm using it as a way to imagine, represent, and celebrate my family's history in that time period in particular as what should be a collectively owned American history. So there is an image which maybe can be pulled up now that's an example of the kind of work I'm doing. And in the process of having that, I'm on a tablet, so I might not see the image. So if somebody can tell me when it pops up.
It's there, Terry. We can see the image.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had to switch to my tablet.
No.
So that's what I'm working on now, of an unknown person in my family's history who seems to be a debutante or a soprano or something. But the one over my shoulder is probably more representative of a style that wasn't intentional, but in the process of eliminating the detail of the faces and just focusing on gestures and positions and some of the decor of the rooms, I ended up doing a piece of work that people from a variety of ethnic and national backgrounds responded to. Specifically, when I was talking to my late brother-in-law, who was Italian-American, and I said every African-American had that parlor. He said every Italian-American had that parlor. And it just went on, every Jewish-American, every Japanese-American. So the work somehow evokes something in people that brings us closer rather than far apart. So as you know, from my little write-up, I did work for over 30 years in a variety of places. I'm trained in architecture and planning like some of our colleagues. And I started thinking about the ways in which my work, especially now, differs from my previous life. And so I'm going to highlight 5 things. I'd be happy to hear what people think about them eventually. One thing I realize is that this kind of work is personal, it's solitary, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way. It's purely a descriptor. Unlike musicians, dancers, choreographers, actors, and writers to a certain extent, the work that you do, the way you get it on canvas, the way you get it out into the world, it's completely on you, with less input from others than some of our other professions. Another big distinction has to do with the audience. The audience for art is as broad and varied as the people who lay eyes on our work, and that could be in person, but more and more it could be over the internet. The audience is not as restricted or narrow as an academic audience, for example, which requires a certain level and kind of literacy and access, which is often circumscribed by money in order to be appreciated. The criteria for judging work like mine is not as circumscribed as it is in academia as well, and that's actually a good thing. So linked to that, I realized that my finished work is always incomplete by nature. It's the beginning part of a circle, it's the beginning part of a story that's completed by the viewer. And the reaction the work gets, the emotion that the viewer has, is completely out of my control. And that leads me to think of 2 final things. The main thing that you are committing to when you choose the life of an independent artist, it's a complete act of faith. It's like jumping off of that mountain, that proverbial mountain. You do the work you're meant to do, you do the work that only you can do, but you put your work out into the world to be completed by others. And lastly, ironically, this means that your very private, personal, solitary creation is indeed a work of public, community, or communal art, because it is completed by others, and it makes its statement a statement in a world that's far greater, far larger, far longer lasting than your own. And there's no pressure there, right? So if I guess the little video can be queued up, I will use that as a way to end my remarks. I am inspired when I teach. I'm inspired by travel, because when you travel, which I do a lot, you have to be open and vulnerable.
because you don't know, like your normal stuff doesn't work, so you have to be vulnerable, means you have to look more, and you have to be more open if you're a wanderer. I think I put myself in that category more than traveler. And I guess you look at the work, the struggles of people who went before us, especially now we're so aware of what so many people went through on a day-to-day basis. And they never gave up. And they weren't necessarily painting. They were doing work that was just a lot harder, a lot less glorious, and they did it. They never complained. They never gave up.
This evening is a conversation about art and society, how art affects society, and how society underpins art. In my case, the two important things to start off with, and this will be a little bit of a roller coaster of a discussion, or a presentation. So please fasten your seatbelts. We're going to talk about, but we're not going to talk about income inequality. That's a political science, economics, etc., historical issue. I could talk about it at great length, but it really is what I was interested in, and how the interest came to be is of importance, because we form ideas, we create art based on research, whether we know it or not. We do a lot of thinking, we do a lot of looking, we do a lot of listening, and then we do something, we create the art. So the story of, how did I get interested in income inequality back in 2011, in fact, there was this thing called Occupy Wall Street, which some people remember. It was this idea that we were going to protest, and that there was a 1 and a 99, and that there wasn't equality in our world. Well, this was quite interesting and new, and these encampments in Zuccotti Park in Manhattan and all around the country, in fact around the world. One was happening in downtown Boston in a financial district called Dewey Square. And you'll see in the first picture, I heard about it, and I went down to see it, and I took my smartphone, not my real camera, but a little smartphone, and took these half-baked pictures, the first and then the second, of this encampment. And you can take them off now. But the point of these encampments were that they reminded me of 60s hippies, California be-ins. And I kept wondering, what's going to come of this? Is there any validity to this all? We did get the 1 and the 99 out of it. And then about 2 years later, a book came out by the French economist Thomas Piketty, Capitalism in the 21st Century, translated the next year, 2014. It was a monumental tome, 684 pages. And of course, nobody read it, but we all read the reviews. So I read lots of reviews about the book, and became intrigued, absolutely fascinated by this issue of income inequality that was not just a national issue, but a global issue. And in the US, as in certain other countries, was getting worse. And in fact, had actually begun to be a problem as I read more, starting in 1978, 1980, when the middle class incomes flattened, adjusted for inflation. So it led to a whole series of inquiries on my part and photographs, and you'll see in the first this picture of the bridge. This is shot up in Lowell, Massachusetts, the old mill town. And as you look through the bridge, there's probably a former worker from the mill plant in the far distance that's now luxury condos, working his way back across the bridge to his small house far away from the mill, now luxury condo. And the second picture of this couple with the wife who decided, this is in Salem, New Hampshire, the wife decided she had to go back to work. Husband was working full time. She's back to work part time in order to make extra money. Why? Well, to fix up this old farmhouse, the cost of housing, to help with the education. Public school education is not free. There are all sorts of add-ons to public education that you pay for. So how does the middle class make it? Well, they make it by having two people working now, not one person working. And in the final picture, the closer to home for all of us, is a university professor with his son who's busy filling out financial aid for high school for him to go to a better school than the local public school in order for him to get into a better college. That's very important. It was very important in that family. So all of these pictures tell stories. They have points to make, and there are many more that will be shown at Mann Library in September. But the issue really is, how do you get to see, how do you focus on this when we're deluged by images? Remember that we are in the age of the internet and Instagram, and we're flooded with images. Worse than that, now in 2021, studies show that we see between 4,000 and 10,000 advertising images each day. Realize it or not. So how, with all that mass morass passing by us, how can we focus on serious pictures, serious images, serious art that reflects problems in society? That is an issue. And that's where we really do need to think about, how do we focus? So if we go to the first picture of the clipping from the New York Times, if that's up, this shows that we really are spending between 15 and 30 seconds looking at great art. And if we move on to the next and one beyond that, the highlighted shows average 25 seconds. Somebody actually spent, I think, 3 minutes in this study looking at 3.5 minutes looking at a Rembrandt, but that was the outlier. So, and you can get rid of those slides. So really the issue now is, it's sort of, as I put it together into Leonardo, Monet, and me. How are we going to get people to spend more than 15 to 30 seconds if they won't spend much time looking at Leonardo or Monet? How are they going to spend any time in this morass of advertising and in the age of Instagram focusing on art related to society, photojournalism related to the issues and problems in society? And this takes us on to the next stage and the next issue, which is really brings me back to medicine and neurology and neuroscience. It's the issue of how do we perceive art? How should we display art? Because and we can use the tools of neuroscience, the things like dwell time. How long do your eyes spend looking at something, at an object? And does it cause an emotional response? You can use galvanic skin response. And then ask people afterwards, what do you remember? So those are real measures of how do we or how should we exhibit art to allow it to enter our brains and affect our souls. And with that, we've come to the end of this whirligig of ideas, and I'll pass it on to the next.
Thank you, Julian. Pradeep from Mumbai.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you to Professor Nima Kover for inviting me to join this conversation. I've been in Mumbai for now 5 months, and the longest I've been here in 30 years since I left. And as all of you know from the media coverage, that the situation here has become unimaginably difficult and tragic, especially in the past month. So it feels a bit surreal to speak of my work from here and now in the situation. But I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to just speak a little bit about a recent project that I made during a residency at the Elizabeth Foundation in New York in 2019. It's an interesting residency. It's designed for people who actually work in the arts as administrators, working to help other artists work on their work or to move their careers. And this was a way for people who work in administration to actually spend the time and focus on their own work. And so it felt great to be with a group of artists and kind of think and make work. In a way, this project for me has been a little bit different from how I've made work, which was very similar to how Terry speaks of it, which is solitary and individually. And here I found myself both making this new project with a group of people and then also testing out ideas in a workshop at Pratt with a colleague of mine, Fia Backstrom. And then we made an artist book that also came out of this work jointly and collaboratively. So it's been a different kind of experience. But what I'm going to try and do right now is just quickly speak a little bit about the process of how this project came together in this work and some of the ideas that are underlying this thinking. A lot of this came through when I had to write this little essay for this book as a way to really probe the process and the ideas that influence the work. So one starting point for this work was seeing a small show in an annex gallery of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which had some superb botanical and natural history paintings by Mughal painters hired by British administrators and amateur botanists in the 18th century. So I was struck by these incredibly beautiful and powerful painters and the work and their ability to describe in vivid detail what they were observing. You know, it could be the tripartite pattern of feathers on the wings of a bird. It could be the densely patterned scales of a Bengal river fish and the fur and veining of the wings of a fruit bat. Now, these were so beautifully observed and exquisitely painted, yet the British patrons thought they were not properly scientific. So I was wondering about this high ground of modern science in the West and then what was dismissed as ornamental and decorative. I also was thinking about what it means to encounter work in space, like in this case for me to see it in an exhibition. And I felt that the visceral and not easily explainable attraction to these paintings happened in this in-person physical encounter. And I try and think a little bit about what does it mean, like in these past 14 months, I've not been to a museum or art gallery, and what does it mean to see images in a book or a screen and realize that they don't quite have the same power of getting sharply under your skin and staying there that it does in this physical encounter. So maybe this will be a conversation with Julian about the minimal amount of time that we may spend in front of work. I'm going to just speak a little bit about the process of making these images. So I kept nudging the process along step after step. I would make a photograph, I'd print it, make a photocopy of it, heat transfer the image onto a copper plate, ink the plate, run it through an etching press, and print on wet paper. And I really liked the relief-like indention and the three-dimensionality of the image and the way the ink sits on paper, quite unlike photography. And I liked the vibrancy of the pigments and the immense possibilities of transforming color by mixing etching inks and oil. So the softness of the image and the diffuse edges of the lines were the opposite of what I would look for in printing a photograph. So it was another form of clarity and then another displacement of the image. I really marveled at the mottled vegetal pattern. You'll see a little bit in the images there and how it registered on shallow relief on paper. And as I scanned these prints and then printed them as photographs, another kind of image emerged, one with a condensation of detail, less delicate and a lot stranger than the prints. And the rich umber and ochre browns and pale yellows of the etching inks and to see how they translated into digital photography. I think a little bit about the artist Annie Albers, and she uses the word matière, which means the surface appearance of material, such as grain, roughness, or smoothness, dullness, or gloss, qualities of appearance that she says can be observed by touch. And she says that matière, like color, cannot be experienced intellectually. It has to be approached just like color, non-analytically and receptively. And then another thing that is not quite processed, but just as a way that my thinking underlying this work was playing out. So a few years ago, I'd seen another superb exhibition of paintings and objects from the Deccan region in India at the Met again. And I saw paintings attributed to the Baudelaire painter, and then another set of miniatures attributed to the Paris painter, and yet another series by the Dublin painter. A first thought was that these might be English, French, and Irish painters who had made their work in the Islamic style for their courts and rulers. So I was taken aback to learn how wrong I was. The Baudelaire painter was a name assigned to an artist whose painting is in the University of Oxford's Baudelaire Library. Scholars now think that that is Ali Riza, an artist active in about 1600 to 1650 in Bijapur in India, is the Baudelaire painter. Similarly, the paintings attributed to the Paris painter are so assigned because they are some works by this painter at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And the Dublin painter was named thus because his paintings are in the collection of the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. So this kind of naming appears practical and obvious. However, it is at yet another level a reattribution, a staking of ownership and control. So vast quantity of Indian artistic heritage is today in the West. The finest and most in-depth collections are in England, the United States, Denmark, and Switzerland. The collections in museums in New Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai are painfully modest in comparison. So I want to kind of think about this feeling of estrangement from a full knowledge of my own cultural history and the limitations of English language in framing this knowledge. I wanted to kind of mention a little note that is made by the linguist and poet and translator A.K. Ramanujan, who is a teacher in Chicago. And he says that while English has distorted our traditions, it has also made us look at our traditions. This whole question of colonial distortion has been formulated in English. So it requires a dialogue with English. English has been the other through which we have returned to ourselves. English has made us self-critical and made us critical of English itself. So my text in the booklet is interwoven with that of my collaborator Fia Backstrom's text. And initially I was resistant to the idea, and I wanted to hold the context for my work close in. And I was wary of my work becoming diffuse and decontextualized. Yet I found that the unease and the wariness of that actually helped sharpen my own thinking and writing and the work itself. So I'll stop here, and I hope that we can pick up these ideas in the conversation after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. You know, when I invited our four panelists to come together, I saw these sorts of relationships in the work that they were doing. And I think some of it, Pradeep picked up on, For me, the question of decolonization, how does one approach a colonized history, which Santi, works through in the mush hole, of reclaiming a past and of finding within it healing, spoke so much for me with some of the work that Pradeep was talking about in the work that he's doing now, and in that longer artist book, if you read it. And so that was what sort of one pairing that I thought about a lot. And also Terry's work. I am fascinated by the fact that, what Terry talked about today is what comes out of the work that applies to all these other hyphenated Americans, or the fact that the faces in her paintings are so, I don't know if indeterminate is the right word, Terry, but at one way of sort of thinking about them. And what Julian was talking about today, which is about the viewer, right? And how do we then close that circle, and how do we bring our experience to looking at the work that people like the four of you produce? And so so many thoughts based on like the wonderful work that you've shared and how you've been talking about it, and I see the questions coming in, and there's one question here which ties back a little bit to what you've been talking about in terms of telling your stories, right? Each of you spoke about what inspired you to tell a particular story, where that story really began from. The Laura is from New York City, and Laura's asking, how did you choose a particular medium? Does the medium that you're working in also begin to define the story that you tell in different ways? Right? I mean, you've talked, I think Pradeep and Terry have talked about what it means to do work in a solitary fashion, or with Santi, what it means to work collaboratively. But here it's the question of the medium itself and whether that begins to define how one tells these stories, how one practices. Anybody? Terry, you're smiling.
Because I don't mind. I have lots to say, but I never like to do.
Go right ahead. Why don't you start?
When I was teaching, the students knew just walk out of the room because I'll still be talking.
If you allow me to shut you up after a little bit of time, you can start.
Certainly. Well, two things come to mind, and I'd be interested to hear about the others. My first memory of a first memory of my parents, and my first memory of art was sitting on my mother's lap looking at this giant book of paintings, and they were paintings of the French Impressionists. I think I still have the book. It's not as big as I thought, but I think I know that when I do my work, which in a way is work that is considered to be outdated every 10 years, nobody wants to do representational. Why do Americans like Monet so much? I know that, first of all, it's what I am drawn to because I'm an easel painter, but it also links me very much to that memory of sitting on my mother's lap. My dad was an architect, so I kind of got it from both sides. The other thing is I'm kind of acquisitive, so I've tried almost everything, and I have a decent facility with a lot of other ways of making art, and I would love to perfect all of them. At some point, you realize there's only so much time, and in order to do well in something, you really have to focus on it. So seeing my hand in something seems to be the most important. So oil painting, watercolor drawing, a little bit of sculpture. I did a forensic workshop a couple of years ago where we, with the dental remains and a little bit of information about people whose remains were found, but they were unidentified, we were able to reconstruct the bust in clay. Mine happened to be a young man who died crossing the border in Pima County. So, that was an experience that allowed me to explore sculpture a little more and also do it in a way that felt very purposeful. But I think in a way, this is the long way of saying that the medium kind of chooses you.
Mm. Santi, you want to talk about that? The medium kind of chooses you?
For sure, I feel the same way. So I have been gifted the dance and the performance since a very young age. So I don't remember clearly because I was little, but as soon as I would hear music, I would fall into a improvisation that could last for hours. So as long as the music played, I was moving and dancing. And as a little person, it was quite obvious and interesting for my grandmother to watch me, and she could watch me for hours. But I come from a family of artists, so I happen to be the one that is mostly embodied. I also am a multidisciplinary, so I do pottery design. And if you can see the pieces behind me, those pieces are from my father. My grandmother revived the lost art of Gaingahaga pottery making to 6 nations. And so we have this way of, and I think about her and why did she want to innovate? Why did she want to also look back into our ancestral knowledges and remember and discover? And why did she want to dig her own clay? And I feel like that sort of alignment with creativity, with the natural living creative universe is very much present in my family. And so it would just made sense that I would continue in that line, in that long line of artists. And I did go to McMaster University and did a degree in kinesiology and psychology, and I thought I'd go into that direction. But really, when you know what your passion is, nothing replaces it. So I ended up migrating back into performance, and still very much enjoy that. And I think it was Julian who said a lot of there's tons of research that happens. So that's another part of the process of research, and years of research before production happens. Like for the mush hole, we did 2 years of research. So I think that's...
I feel the same way that, as Terry said, that art chooses us. I was feeling a little inadequate just moments before. Well, all I've done is photography. Oh. I did try watercolor, and I was an absolute and complete dismal failure. At least I acknowledged it early on and didn't pursue it. But yes, art chooses us. And if we find something that we can use to express, then we should keep talking, keep expressing.
I'm keeping an eye on time here. And you know, I was just thinking, listening to Pradeep talk about the process that he goes through, that I think for each of you, there's been sort of a staying in the process, a staying in the image, in a thought, in an expression, and extending the moment while you're exploring what that expression and that thought is, to begin to really explore it further, to give it a name, to remove it from those silent spaces, to create that space of safety or of exploration. And there is something about that pulling of that moment. And I know we have just 1 minute left. So Pradeep, I hope we can continue that conversation in the next 45 minutes that we're going to have with the students who are going to join us for the second half. But here today, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us. I hope that you got a sense of ways in which you could sit in the moment, ways in which you could pull it further, look into it, be an ally, renew your own passion to engage in the world. And I want to close by reciting a few lines from a poem that has become quite a favorite of mine this year. It's called Holding the Light by Stuart Kastenbaum. And I'm just reciting the last 2 paragraphs where he says, "Make a place where the day speaks to the night and the earth speaks to the sky. Whether we created God or God created us, it all comes down to this. In our imperfect world, we are meant to repair and stitch together what beauty there is. Stitch it with compassion and wire. See how everything we have made gathers the light inside itself and overflows? A blessing." So thank you all, and thank you to our 4 panelists for this blessing. And good night. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yahweh, thank you.
Thank you.